So we would like to warmly welcome our Pratt managers who chair both Pratt and URR in the regions. We are very thankful to have them to provide clarity on the law, and particularly the behavior section for our group, but they can clarify all things on the lawn, as well as the level of supervision that we tend to, lean on a lot as well in our roles. So we have our Pratt manager from the West region, Ryan Patton. We have our South Region Pratt Manager, Mary Beth Stanisario. And you see Heather's name here on the PowerPoint, but she is no longer in this role. So our newest North Region Pratt Manager as of July 1st is Susan Clem. And as I said before, our presenters will answer questions at the end. You can feel free to add them to the chat, or you can get the chance to unmute after they're finished at the end. And they will be sharing the PowerPoint afterward that I'll be sending out for people to have as a reference point in addition to this recording. All right, I will let you all take it away. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Thank you, Brooke. Welcome, everyone. We did at the end, Ryan and I will be going back and forth with the slides. Susan is observing today, but we did at the end of the PowerPoint, you'll see all three of our names. We did add Susan's name is the North Region Pratt Manager, and we're probably going to be making some revisions at some point, which then we'll update accordingly. But Heather did help us with making the original presentation, so that's why her name is still on there. So welcome. Just wanted everybody to see my face. I'm going to just turn my camera off because I'm having trouble with the PowerPoint if I have it up. So hold on one second. So as I said, welcome. Ryan and I are very happy to do this presentation. I do want to preface it by saying, and I think Brooke said it, is, the level of need is a case management tool. So the presentation that we do is coming from a case management perspective. However, all disciplines are definitely needed to assist in the case manager completing an accurate LON. So keep in mind, obviously if you have questions, put them in the chat. We can answer them at the end, or you can ask questions then. But I just wanted to clarify that to begin with. And that's why we call it the level of need accuracy training, because it's very important to have an accurate LON. And as we go through the PowerPoint, in the first couple of slides, it will talk about why that is. All right. So, and I just need to, hold on one second. Okay, there we go. Oh, I think I did the wrong one. There we go. Sorry. Here's our first one. So to first start off with, we talk about how the level of need assessment is used to support individuals by the department. So the level of need identifies potential risks that could affect the health and safety of individuals and support the development of a comprehensive individual plan to address potential risks. And those risks actually come once the LON is completed, it generates a risk summary report. So that's what that references to later in the presentation. We will show you the LON summary. It identifies areas of support that may need to be addressed to assist the individual in actualizing personal preferences and goals. And one of the, as we talked about, why Pratt is looking at very accurate lines is to determine the individual's needs for supports in an equitable and consistent manner for the purpose of allocating our funding. And the LON score is key consideration in determining that funding allocation. So Pratt is given our funding guidelines. As a matter of fact, we just had new ones sent out that are effective July 1st. They're in the process of updating our contract system and our IP to get those new rates in there. But, when we're at Pratt, we use those funding guidelines, and based on the level of need, that's how we allocate the funding. So that's the importance of ensuring that the accurate is the lawn is accurate.
I'm listening to a presentation for work.
Oh, I don't know if you want to put that on
If people
mute.
could
So,
please mute. Yes.
So it is also very important to know the lawn does not take the place of other assessments. Many years ago, that was kind of the myth, that this is now the assessment tool. But this is why other disciplines, it's a very critical part of, um, you know, having an accurate lawn, because other assessments should assist in providing information to complete an accurate lawn. So we rely a lot on behavioral guidelines or behavior support plans. OT, PT, speech might be appropriate for certain individuals. Life skills assessments, residential skills assessment, as some examples of when you're looking at a lawn, either whether it's the initial lawn or the yearly review, that this documentation is presented to the case manager so that the lawn can be completed accurately. So, all disciplines are essential in ensuring this. So examples of significant ongoing and long-term changes in a person's life that would require an updated lawn. And I'm looking here, why these? Yeah, I'm going ahead too far. I apologize. So I'm just going to backtrack because I went to the fourth slide instead of the third, so I apologize. How often is a lawn updated? So a lawn is updated before the initial plan. So actually, that's the initial one. It's updated 90 days or fewer before the individual plan meeting, but not more than 12 months after the last lawn. So when you're preparing for the annual meeting, that is another time. Updated as needed to reflect significant ongoing and long-term changes in a person's life. Review when making a request to Pratt and update if necessary. So it's not required to be updated, but you're just looking it over to make sure that it's up to date. And it's also as part of the initial transition process for high school students at the age of 18. So a lot of our res age outs that are assigned case managers, and when you're assigned a case manager, there is no level of need. So that would be the time that you would do the initial level of need for them. So now there's examples of significant ongoing and long-term changes in a person's life that would require an updated lawn. So Rachel's experienced a stroke, which permanently impacted her ability to walk. Since her last lawn review, she started utilizing a wheelchair for ambulation, right? So that is very, very likely to be a long-term change. It's significant. She's utilizing things she's never used before, so you would update the lawn accordingly. Shannon successfully transitioned from individualized day group support to group supported employment. So you might have somebody who wanted individualized day, and they decide, you know what, I'd rather do some work. So in the process of that, they found another day program. So that may be updated that they're going to group supported employment. Ted was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's over the last 6 months. He no longer showers and dresses independently. He now needs prompting to successfully complete these tasks. Now, this is twofold. We have a brand new diagnosis, and there's documentation from a physician with this diagnosis, so you obviously want to add that. And then we are seeing some areas that he has no longer able to do independently, so that would be something that would be updated accordingly. So you might have an annual meeting in September of 2024, and the team is noticing things, and they decide to make a referral and go see Dr. Cairns or what have you. And this is in February of 2025. get the diagnosis, you're seeing these things, that would be the point of updating the lawn. So you might be seeing these things. You wouldn't necessarily update those right away, but the team is discussing having him evaluated for dementia or Alzheimer's, right? So once that diagnosis is confirmed, that's when you would go and update the level of need based on the diagnosis and the things that, the areas that you've seen decrease. Examples of significant ongoing and short-term changes in a person's life that would not require an updated lawn. Rachel broke her legs, temporarily utilizing a wheelchair. Her doctor anticipates she will make a full recovery once her cast is removed and she completes physical therapy. So this is a short term, in probably 99% of the time, it's a short term injury that over time, the expectation is the individual will be back to baseline. So at that point, you would not update the lawn. As described in her enhanced staffing titration plan, Shannon is participating in group supported employment for 1 hour a day. Her assigned one-to-one staff is available to support her when needed. Okay, that's part of a staff titration plan or a FADE plan. So most often or typically she is getting one-to-one staff. So you're not going to update the lawn based on the titration. Another area, Ted is recovering from shoulder surgery. During his recovery, he needs support showering and dressing. Once he fully recovers, he will complete these tasks independently. So from a case management point of view, they may get a phone call from, a family member, or maybe they live in a group home or they're in a CCH saying, oh, we have to update the level of need for some of these situations. That's where the case manager would say these are, short-term situations. Let's see where Rachel or Ted is at when we meet for the annual. And then we can update it accordingly at that point. Versus the previous slide, case manager may get that call, have the documentation to support it. Therefore, their long-term situations or significant life changes that would allow the case manager to say, yes, let's clone it and do this. You want to be very aware that, a case manager should not be cloning and updating a lawn if documentation is not provided to the case manager. And when we say documentation, we're saying, as I said earlier, was there a speech eval done, MBS done? Is it OT, PT? Is there behavior support plan guidelines? What have you? Because it's not just an email to the case manager with, oh, number 16 has to be changed, 32 has to be changed, 52 has to be changed, that sort of thing. And then you clone it and do it. It's like, why do those things have to be changed? Where's the documentation to support making those changes? So you want to keep that in mind. Documentation has to be provided for that lawn to be cloned and updated. The level of need does cover many areas: health and medical, PICA, behavior, psychiatric, criminal, sexual issues, seizure, mobility, safety, comprehension and understanding, social life, communication, personal care, and daily living. So those are the areas that it covers. The lawn scores. The scores are combined and calculated on the LANS algorithm that may result in an overall composite score or for residential or day respectively, okay? And I like to note here, the algorithm is behind the scenes. Once a level of need is inputted and is hit complete, it generates the risk summary report with the level of need score. No one knows what increases a lawn or decreases a lawn or makes it stay the same, which is why documentation is crucial in completing a accurate lawn. The score of 0 represents the greatest skill level in an area. Every increase in score represents an increased need for that support area. And each domain has a maximum score, and not all domains go as high as 8, which this is where we're going to show you. So this is the report that is generated that goes over the LAN score that I was referring to earlier. So you're going to see here where this particular individual has a medical LAN score health of 2, PICA 0, so there's no PICA, a behavior score of 6 for both res and day. There's no psychiatric diagnosis or criminal or sexual issues, seizures noted a 1, mobility a 1, safety 6, and so on. And this is also a breakdown of the scores. Sometimes this is actually very helpful when we're doing LAN increases of 2 or more, because we could actually maybe see in a lot of respects of where some of the changes would have occurred. Oh. All right, there I go. Which one did I do? Okay. And this is the area that case managers look at to see where what needs to be identified in the individual plan. So this is the risk summary of this individual requires food or liquid to be in a particular consistency or size. Also, we'd want to see the order for that. Unusual food preference, medications that require careful monitoring for side effects, other medication risks. All, important, because somebody could ask, well, where are the food guidelines? Where are this? So that's why the documentation is important. Personal care, it goes over with personal care, the behaviors that are checked off, safety issues, all of which, anything in here should be identified in some way in the individual plan. Doesn't always have to be an action step, but you would want to identify these as part of the individual plan. And then here is the overall LAN score, which also is a 6. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Nice job.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone. My name is Ryan Patton. I'm the West Region Pratt Manager, and I'll be starting on slide 12. So,
I'm going to make sure I do
used...
it. Ryan, I'll make sure I do it right for you. Sorry. I was jumping ahead. Sorry about that.
No. How the lawn is used to determine services and funding allocations. Pratt will base funding allocations on the behavior score or the composite LAN score, whichever is higher. People with the composite scores of 0 are not eligible to be enrolled in the DDS waivers. Although I will note that we've never seen, even if somebody is 0 in all categories, the LAN score still comes out to 1. So, we all say that we would all at least be a 1 on the LAN, so to speak. Those with a score of 1 to 2 or 2 are considered minimum level of support. Those with a score of 3 or 4 are considered to be a moderate level of support. Those with a score of 5, 6, or 7 are considered to require a comprehensive level of support. And lastly, individuals with a composite score of 8 are considered to have support needs that require an allocation based on their individual support needs. So, that'd be more 1-to-1 supports, 2-to-1 supports. They may need some nursing or have a more comprehensive behavior plan. But that can be applicable to multiple LAN scores. LAN review tip number 1. The LAN reflects the level of support the individual typically utilizes. Example, Kayla often refuses to get dressed and walks away from staff members when they assist her with dressing in the morning. Usually, the staff can distract Kayla by talking about the day's activities. However, one person hands-on support is needed a few times a year to finish the task. Kayla's lawn should reflect what level of support she typically utilizes when dressing and undressing. Verbal or gestural distraction or prompting, even though it is not always the case. So as you can see here, question number 22, dressing and undressing, the middle option would be selected, able to get dressed but needs prompting, or may need help with choosing weather appropriate clothing. Lawn review tip number 2. The lawn reflects the level of support the individual typically utilizes based on what happens most often or on average, either for the management of the behavior or health condition, excuse me, or to successfully complete a task. Example, Kevin had 2 grand mal seizures in March, 1 aura in June, and another grand mal seizure in December. Kevin's lawn should reflect that he experiences seizures on average less than once per month based on the following calculation. Total number of qualifying seizures in the past year, 3, and divide that by the number of months, 12. In this case, Kevin's rate of grand mal seizures would average out to less than 1 seizure a month. Question number 4 on the lawn states, in the past year, how often did the person have a grand mal or convulsive seizure? No other seizure activity are asked in question 16, and the answer is the second one, as stated above, less than once per month. Lawn review tip number 3. The lawn reflects the level of support the individual truly needs, either for the management of a behavior, condition, or to successfully complete a task. Example, Jose lives in a group home, a CLA. Jose's support needs do not require a staff person to be awake throughout the night, but he does require someone in his residence who can be sleeping in case he needs assistance in the night. However, the CLA requires that a staff person be awake throughout the night. So, example, Jose's lawn should reflect that the level of support he truly utilizes for overnight support, monitoring, or assistance needs a person in his residence who can be sleeping versus what the CLA provides for everyone. So question 84 on the lawn states, during overnight sleep hours, how much support is typically needed for this person? In Jose's case, option number 3 would best fit his needs, requires a person in their residence who can be sleeping. So, in regards to this, the home may have other individuals with different needs for overnight. So you want to really specify what the individual's needs, each one, what they need to be successful and safe overnight.
Yes, right. Thank you for saying that too, because it's not what a person, what they're getting just because the group home requires it. It's what that individual's need actually is. So that was a good summary, Ryan. And I did want to preference, which I forgot to say, I think I sent to you, Brooke, the lawn manual, which is a guide for case managers to share with teams that really is very beneficial in also completing a lawn, especially when teams are kind of at like a crossroad with how to answer. It doesn't give all the answers, but it guides you. And as you see already throughout the PowerPoint, it's based on an individual, what's typically needed or most often, and based on the individual, not on an overall. So I meant to say that in the beginning, so I apologize. I'm sorry, Ryan, go right ahead.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. Okay, line review tip number 4. The line reflects the individual's current support needs or support needed in the past 3 to 6 months. Example, Alfredo works on a landscaping crew. For several years, he has received individualized vocational support on the job. 6 months ago, Alfredo transitioned to group supported employment. Example, Alfredo's line should be updated to reflect he received small group support at his vocational program. Question number 79 on the line states, what level of support, monitoring, or assistance is typically needed during employment, day, school, job, or vocational activities only for those without services? Indicated the predicted level of support. Note, for school-age children, consider only support required the entire time. In Alfredo's case, under the third option and second selection, he is in a small group support now for GSC, or group supported employment. Line tip number 5, for activities the individual does not complete in their daily living situation, the line, excuse me again, the line should reflect how much support the individual would need to successfully complete the task. Example, Nicole has lived with her parents all her life. Her mother continues to do the housework for the household as she has always done. In this case, Nicole does not do any household chores on a regular basis. However, when asked, her mother does say that Nicole has used the washing machine and occasionally helps her to do other household chores, although she needs to keep an eye on Nicole in case she gets distracted. Example, Nicole's line should reflect the support she would need when completing household chores. Those household chores with prompting, monitoring, instruction, or encouragement. Versus choosing the third category, cannot complete the household chores. So this is really really good for, sometimes we have individuals who reside with family or caretaker, and the caretaker, um, no fault of their own, but they're just used to doing everything themselves, and um, not really giving the individual the opportunity to try to see how much they can complete on their own. Um, so, sometimes it is really good just to have those conversations of, seeing, how much independence, how much, is the individual able to model and then successfully take off and complete that task on their own. So I like this slide a lot. But so that is it for me now, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mary Beth. And thank you, Mary Beth, for manning the PowerPoint.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Ryan. Nice job. So next, we're going to enter in evaluating supports based on the level of need, behavior, and mental health domain, which is probably very pertinent to most of you. And one of the things that I think is extremely important and is looking at all the areas of the level of need, that there are definitions and descriptions that should be read prior to completing the questions, right? So you want to, keep that in mind when going through that. So line review tip for behavior and mental health domain, what the support is required, the type, okay? So as you're going to see, this is like a definition that comes from the LON, and these are also where the support the support required. There's also, it defines what it means to mark it 0 through 4, okay? So the support type required is the support typically provided during waking hours. You have to remember the behavior questions, which I believe are 39 through 54, because there's history of, it's only waking hours in the residence or in the day program, okay? Community-based stuff are questions later in the lawn, or overnight stuff is later in the lawn. So those questions in the behavior section are during waking hours only. So it's when this person exhibits, typically provided during waking hours when this person exhibits this behavior. If a treatment plan is actively in place to control a past behavior, the support required would be the waking hours support necessary to keep the behavior controlled. So the support required is the first column in the level of need, and that is when you are marking the support required for when an individual is actually exhibiting the behavior. And that's why it's important for the behavior support plan to be able to identify, what the target behavior is, the definition of the actual behavior, what actions are being taken when they're in the behavior. So, is it 0, no support needed, or can ignore the behavior? 1, monitor only using a person or through environmental means, includes monitoring for behaviors controlled by medication or a treatment plan. When they're in the behavior, do they need a verbal or gestural distraction or prompting? Typically needed. And when you get into 3 and 4, and you're going to say the support required when they're in the behavior requires person hands-on, typically needed to redirect or manage the person. That means that it requires typically, most often, one person hands-on to manage that behavior. Number 4, if you're marking it, more than one person, 2 to 1 typically needed to manage the behavior. And if so, it would need to be explained in the behavior comment section. So as I said, you're looking at these behaviors and you're taking each one. It's good information, because is there a behavior support plan? If there's not a behavior support plan and somebody needs hands-on, whether it's a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1, that's sort of like a red flag. Like, 2 people are hands-on, or there's a restraint required if they go to bolt, or they, are severely physically aggressive or something, but that there's no behavior support plan to kind of guide staff on what this individual needs when they're exhibiting a behavior. Let's just see, make sure. Okay, so the support required type. If 2 different types of support are used, write in the code most frequently provided, as I said, and write in any qualifying comments in the behavior comment box. A higher level of support may include other types of lower level supports. So as an example, Barney has a history of self-injurious behavior. That's question number 46. That is exhibiting through skin picking. His behavior support plan indicates that when Barney engages in this behavior, staff should prompt him to utilize a sensory item as a replacement for the behavior. If he does not respond to a verbal prompt, one hands-on support is typically needed to redirect him from engaging in this behavior. Use of this type of support is rare. This fact results in the support required code 2, verbal or gestural distraction or prompting typically needed, as verbal prompts are most frequently utilized to redirect Barney from engaging in self-injurious behaviors. The comments in the section should be utilized to reflect that Barney sometimes requires hands-on. So as you can see, it's marked support type 2, and support level 1, which we'll get into that. And then there's an exclamation in the comments That most frequently, verbal prompts of support are used to help Barney avoid SIB. On a rare occasion, guide-along support is utilized to redirect him in engaging in SIB. This support was utilized twice in the last 12 months. So as you could see, typically, but your behavior support plan should really be able to define this so you're accurately reflecting typically needed verbal redirection, and then it if needed, goes to the hands-on. So now we'll go into the support level, which the support level is the second column in the behavior section, which indicates the level or intensity of a support typically or usually provided during waking hours only, not when engaging in that target behavior. In some cases, it may be easier to think of in terms of frequency of the behavior. So this really, the support level typically needed to manage behaviors during working hours. So what keeps them from the actual behavior occurring, right? And where it says 0 is no support required, 1, less than monthly, episodic, or seasonal only. 2 equals 1 to 3 times a month, 3 once a week, 4 several times a week, 5 once a day or more, 6 continuous support during waking hours. And then we get into 7 and 8, can never be left alone in a room, always in constant line of sight for behavioral support. 8 can never be left alone in a room, always be within arm's length for behavioral support, which we'll get into that a little bit. Support level code 6 is used for any continuous support provided during waking hours. The individual does experience some time they do not receive line of sight or arm's length support. Example, Mandy's treatment plan reflects that she has a pattern of abruptly leaving staff support or bolting when she experiences frequent frustration or anxiety. This behavior has been observed at home, work site, and when she is transported. The plan also indicates the behavior occurs quickly and presents a risk of Mandy being hit by a car. When this behavior emerges, Mandy requires line of sight to ensure her safety. Mandy enjoys time alone in a room and always has privacy when using the restroom. These facts result in a support require code of 3, which is 1 person hands-on typically needed to, and support level for this would be coded as 6, as her treatment plan specifies that she receives continuous support to ensure she is safe when engaging in bolting as a target behavior. And question number 45 is bolting, suddenly running or darting away, excludes wandering away. There's sometimes too, when there's environmental things in the home during waking hours that prevent them, that might be in lieu of staff, right? They might not have a one-to-one, whatever, because they don't need it because they have alarms on the door and this and that, and that's an environmental modification that keeps them from bolting or leaving the premises. That too would be utilized, allow you to mark the behavior support level as 6, because there's something in place continuously that keeps the individual from bolting out of the house. Or when they hear that alarm, Mary Beth is going towards the door, she goes to open the door, there's delayed locks, staff's able to redirect her, whether it is through hands-on or it is through verbal redirection. You're using that in lieu of maybe staffing or something, which I believe is also something in our the lawn manual that talks about environmental stuff for modifications for this type with behaviors. So here we get with support levels coding, the second column support level, a 7 or an 8. Code 7 and 8 can only be used if the person can never be left alone in the room and must always be line of sight for code 7, or arm's length, code 8. Never and always means never and always. It means if they can be in the bathroom alone, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, they are now out of line of sight, staff is not in the room with them, or they're not arm's length. cannot code that support level a 7 or an 8. So as an example, John has a history of impulsive food ingestion. John has not exhibited this behavior as a result of an effective treatment plan. This fact results in a support required of 1 monitor only using a person and a treatment plan. Support level for this item would be coded as 7, as his treatment plan specifies that he can never be left alone, and always be within line of sight to assure he does not engage in impulsive food ingestion. And so, as you'll see, that's where the support level is marked a 7. Just hold on. Behavior and mental health domain, questions 39 to 49. Refer to specific behaviors in which occurred or were addressed by a treatment plan in the past year. Behaviors exhibited over 12 months ago should only be considered in this first section if a treatment plan is still actively in place to manage them. So you would, sometimes individuals have a behavior and there's not a behavior plan. It occurred in the last year, but nothing ever came of it and it kind of just stopped, so to speak. So then the next year, that behavior would actually be removed. It did not occur ever again. There's no behavior support plan in place, so it's no longer there. But that's why we actually clone LONs, because we keep the history. By, you don't just incomplete a LON and take it off. You keep that, you clone it. So we have a chronic history of what the level of needs look like over several years or what have you. Site visit scenario. Sandra's LON indicates impulsive food or liquid ingestion is a behavioral need that requires verbal redirection to prevent, and based on this need, Sandra can never be left alone. See number 48, which is question number 48. In contrast, the BSP indicates September of 2022 removal of target behavior, food seeking as a behavior, has not been observed in several years. Since this behavior has not been observed in several years and she did not receive defined BSP intervention to prevent this behavior, this section of the LON should be updated during her next review. If all factors remain the same, this should be removed as a current behavior. So you'll see through the years, she had it, and now it's saying that she has not had it since September of 2022, and now it's, July of 2025. That should be removed. Which was, I was saying too, sometimes you look at behaviors. This is the other thing where they've had it and then they haven't done it. That's not part of a behavior support plan. So it should be removed. But if you see the history of the level of needs, you would see that it actually happened, or had that behavior. And sometimes it's during the year. As I said, it could be something that just, emerged in the past year and then it doesn't happen again. So those are the two areas where you're looking at, oh, does she still do this? This happened last year around the time that a significant family member passed away. Since then, it has not occurred. We haven't had to address it. Should we remove this if it's over 12 months and no behavior plan? And now I will turn it over to Ryan.
Okay, thank you, Mary Beth. Okay, so LON review tip, continuing the behavior and mental health domain, questions 50 to 55. Questions 50 and 51. These questions reflect whether the individual has exhibited sexually inappropriate behavior or criminal offenses happening in the past year. Sometimes there'll be information stemming from years ago, and what I like to do or would advise people to do is to maybe write a note with some historical information, reflecting what happened. If people want to just acknowledge that this has happened in the past, but the LON should reflect what happened within the past 12 months. Questions 52 to 55. These questions reflect whether the individual has a history of sexual or physical assault or criminal behaviors that occurred more than 1 year ago. So again, there is a section for that specifically. Um, but sometimes we find that the information is still being presented as current when it's been more than 1 year. The same behavior cannot be marked as having occurred within the past year and more than 1 year ago. So just that. Example of the same behavior marked as having occurred within the past year and more than 1 year ago. Questions 43 and 53. Behaviors in the past year, as you can see, and then history of sexual or physical assault or criminal behaviors. So,
Right.
so
Yeah. So, and I just want to, preface that too, especially question number, oh no, I'm sorry. Never mind. This is physical. I take that back.
no. If you have anything
I
to
thought,
add,
no,
please feel
no,
free.
no. I thought this, I thought this was the one that was, sexual, abuse.
Oh,
That wasn't marked yet because this says history of severe physical assault. I was just looking at the above it where it said history of sexual or physical assault, but that's not that question. So I apologize.
no, you're fine. Long review tip. Continuing correctly defining bolting and wandering as target behaviors. Bolting is question number 45 and wandering is question number 49. Question 45. Bolting is to intentionally suddenly run away or abruptly leave a location. Where question 49, wandering is to travel from one place to another without intent or awareness of their surroundings. So typically we see that um, you know, sometimes there'll be requests or concerns about wandering, and hopefully with staff support, they'll be able to be redirected back to their safe location. Bolting, we seem to be a little more cautious of that, more concerned, especially if they're residing or going to day program or work in a busy area and there's a lot of traffic and stuff. So um, not that both aren't concerning, but bolting is really alarming for us. So um questions 56 and 57B. Questions 56 and 57A. These questions should reflect whether the individual is diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, mood disorder, and or psychiatric or mental health condition. So again, we usually look for some type of diagnosis. Sometimes people will have, their written formal diagnosis available. Sometimes it's carried on in the case record over years. And we definitely check to see how the individual and the team are addressing that. Whether it's, visiting the doctor through therapy, medication, behavior support plan, um, if there's any med orders involved to address what they have going on. Question 77 reflects significant incidences that occurred within the last 12 months. The comments section should be used to provide a description of these events. Excuse me. Reminder, if more than 12 months have passed since an event, the applicable section should not be selected. Information about the past event can be added in the comments. So it's pretty much what I've alluded to before. Sometimes individuals go through things that are very life-changing, have had a severe impact on them and others. And, if things have not occurred within the past 12 months and you still just want to keep that historical information, especially, if something else happens in the future, at least you have that information to be shared amongst the team, or if the case is transferred to another case manager and team. Um, and it gives you a series of different reasons why, if somebody got severely injured, if there was emergency hospitalization, somebody went missing, like they bolted, um, fire, so it covers a great deal of different, um, concerning events for the individual that they may have experienced.
And I have noticed on this question, this one always typically will end up on the risk summary of that report that I showed earlier. So in some cases, as I said, not everything on that risk summary has to be identified in an individual plan, but it would be mentioned. So let's look at emergency hospitalization. And just to note, emergency hospitalization is not an ED visit. It's maybe you went to the ED, but then you got admitted. Okay. But in any event, this is showing up on the risk summary, emergency hospitalization. Maybe it's not going to be an action step because maybe it was something like we said earlier, somebody fell, broke their leg, was admitted, had surgery, but you would probably note that under the health section. And then by the time the IP comes, it might be already resolved. But this is just an area and an example of where the case manager and the team would not necessarily have to have an action step, but would identify it someplace in the line because one of these areas, if checked off, would show up on that risk summary.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, that lawn summary with the risk to be addressed in the IP, yeah, definitely it would reflect that. So thank you, Mary Beth.
No problem.
Next section is waking hours level support. Consider the support needs of the person for support, monitoring, and assistance during waking hours only. Overnight support is assessed later in the form. So does the person require any of the following during awake hours? This may include waking hours at his or her home or residence, day, school, job, or vocational program, or work. So, door chimes, and now we're using assistive technology too, more so. So this could be, mount cameras, you know, like what do they use now? Chime and the door. Someone help me out here. Everybody uses it. But different AT stuff too can be used for this section. In this case, the thank you, Ring, yes. In this section, this person does not require any of these, additional AT equipment for their day-to-day.
Sorry, I think I just, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead.
No, you're good. Questions 106 to 110 reflect support the individual may receive from a primary caregiver that is unpaid. Often unpaid caregivers are parents or close relatives who the person lives with, or a CCH provider. When responding to these questions, identify if there is an unpaid caregiver who typically provides the individual with support the majority of the time. So, as you can see, the individual can also be their own can be their own primary caregiver. And we ask case management too to provide the information on when they submit a Pratt request on who the primary caregiver is for a person too. So we want to know if there's any natural supports, if there is another person helping them that is not getting paid through DDS or insurance, and just to see how their network of natural supports are. So this, it says here 106 is the person, his or her own primary caregiver. Does the person have an unpaid caregiver? is the primary caregiver related to this person? Is there a secondary caregiver involved in helping this person? And this can also be applicable to work too. Somebody might have a coworker, an individual may have a coworker that just, naturally assist them in getting through their day to day. So that could be helpful too. Um, but yeah, we definitely look for this information from a prep perspective, just to see if they're have built a network in the community, or just in their life, just to have some natural support. Questions 106 to 110. Identify who should be considered the primary unpaid caregiver. Kendra lives independently. Her family supports her daily with medication administration, meal prep, laundry, and other household chores. Due to his work schedule, Kendra's father is typically only available to support her 1 to 2 days per week. Her cousin provides support during the remaining 5 to 6 days per week. So if somebody can answer, who would be the primary caregiver for Kendra based on this info?
So you could put it in the chat if you don't want to talk.
Yeah.
As I said,
Yeah.
towards case management, but if you
Yeah.
guys want to, just test your knowledge, it's fine. But
Yeah.
we don't really have to if.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it would be
Yeah.
her cousin. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But that's okay. We can. But yeah.
Yeah, we could. I'll just go through the slides real quick then. Brandy's mother serves as her guardian. Although Brandy's mother resides in Connecticut during the winter months, her primary residence is in Georgia. In contrast, Brandy lives with her brother, his wife, and their 2 children in Westbrook. Brandy's sister-in-law supports her with most of her activities of daily living. So in this case, Brandy's sister-in-law would be the primary caregiver. Also to note, the primary caregiver does not necessarily mean they're the guardian too. So they may have a guardian, but the primary caregiver, the person doing majority of the care, may be different.
Thank you, Ryan, for saying that. And I think there's some case management on which this is very key, especially with Pratt requests. So I know it's not for this whole training, but that's what's important. A lot of times we'll get a Pratt request that says, the primary caregiver, and it'll just note the guardian and it'll give the birthday. But if the guardian's not doing the primary caretaking, it should be like in this case, although mom is the guardian, Brandy's birthday should be there. So it's just good information if there's any case management out there. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. And the last slide, Frank lives in an in-law apartment attached to his sister's home. Frank's family typically supports him with showering, grooming, meal planning, and transportation to medical appointments. He receives approximately 4 hours of support daily. Since his sister works full-time, Frank's grandmother visits Frank daily and ensures he receives help with his support needs. So I can imagine, I think Frank's grandma probably is doing the majority of the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
All right. So we have the disagreement with lawn scores. And again, this is for case management. But if there's a disagreement with the team, with the families, with the lawn score, so the lawn manual is pretty crucial, especially when it's difficult coming up with how to market. So review specific questions that may not accurately be reflecting the person's skill level, refer to lawn manual, ensure that all pertinent information has been considered when answering a question, and then at that point, review the lawn with your case management supervisor. And if concerns still exist, you can request a review by the lawn liaison. And we have done that through in case management. So we'll reach out, even if it's just a discussion. But that's that piece. And then, as I said, these are the regional Pratt managers and lawn liaisons: Susan Clem in the North region, myself in the South region, and Ryan patent in the West region. That does conclude the presentation. So now we can open it up to questions.
There is a
And-
question in the chat. I don't know if you see it. Mary
Oh,
Beth.
I didn't put up the chat. Sorry, I'm sorry. Let's see. Let me go to that.
I'm
Do you
checking
have
it
a-
right now.
Okay, great.
So the first one is from Alicia Kroll. What if the support type for a historical behavior is more intense than the current? Should we just clarify in a comment section since we shouldn't be able to list it in the historical section?
Okay, can you read that? I'm trying to see. Can you read that again? What if the support type for historical is more intense than the current? And that could be. So the support type is what they needed when they were in the behavior, right? So that might be, again, you have to remember, especially if it's severe physical assault, right? Or aggression. If you're putting it in history, it's not happening, right? It hasn't happened in the last 12 months. So you shouldn't be marking the level of need in both sections. So if the behavior is still occurring, right? You would mark it in current, not in history of, but then you might note in the comment that although this behavior is still current and part of a plan, historically, the individuals was more intense or blah, 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 whatever you want. So if you're marking severe physical aggression in the history, it means it's not still happening. You would mark it appropriately in terms of what support type he needed when he was doing that behavior many years ago. But if it's not occurring, you might have somebody who has the history of, because it hasn't happened in the last 12 months, but it's happened in the last 13 months. So there's still a behavior support plan. You're going to mark it differently of the support level needed than if this behavior not only hasn't occurred, and it's not part of a behavior plan and hasn't occurred in 12 years, the support type now is probably monitor only, right? Because it hasn't happened in years and it's not part of a behavior support plan. And I don't know if Brooke or anyone might have any more to add or if I'm saying it or not, but I don't know if that makes sense. Ryan? So
No, that makes sense to me. No.
I agree.
Okay.
Okay, next question is from Courtney. How often are caseworkers supposed to be sharing these updates with caregivers, educators? I haven't received any update documents unless I reach out to each individual worker. Well, the
Well,
launch should, go ahead.
no, you go ahead, Ryan.
The launch should be reviewed and at least on a yearly basis, in conjunction with the IP, which is also a yearly requirement. So if there are any significant changes that need to be done, case management, they will update the lawn and should be sharing that.
Right.
And again, I mean, I think it also falls on that team process and this decision making where there might be a temporary change. So, somebody might have broke their foot and they need that enhanced support for a few months. So, you might review the lawn, but is it going to be a continuous thing or is it just something that we all agree upon?
Right.
This is going to be a temporary need.
Correct.
So that may not update in the lawn per se, but it's just the team is aware. So, so again, as you stated, like you reach out to the case manager and state, you would like to see if there's any change to the lawn, if there's an update. Again, it's a team process. And but at least on an annual basis.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, a level of need in the majority of cases should only be done on a yearly basis. So all disciplines, as we talked about earlier, should be included and be providing the documentation to complete that level of need, and would only be cloned and updated if a significant or life-changing event occurred, at which point it's updated and then it would be sent out to the team again. And I
So
do.
Courtney, I hope that answered your question. Next is Wendy. There is often a misunderstanding on what hands-on support means. Agencies often think that if a staff is arm's length, then they are hands-on. I needed to reference the manual with the team to help them understand that close by does not mean hands-on.
I would say correct, but I don't know, Brooke. I mean, hands-on and Ryan or Brooke, maybe it means there's some PMT involved. You shouldn't, arm's length is there, so you're probably would be quick
Correct.
to respond.
That's how I would think of it
But
too.
I don't know. I might defer to Brooke. I'm sorry, Brooke. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
Oh, yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there might be some not restricting movement, but there could be hands-on, like hand over hand or something like that. That wouldn't quite be PMT, but would still, it is physical hands-on. So I agree with Wendy's sentiment.
yes, 100%. Thank you.
Okay. Next is Sherry's question. If an individual requires one-to-one supervision but can be alone in the bathroom, they cannot be marked as 7 or 8 for support on page 6, or if they drop to small group during the overnight.
So the overnight, again, is a separate section. Again, the behavior section is waking hours only. But that is correct. If an individual can, if the staff is not always in the room, never, or never left alone in a room, always line of sight, never left alone in a room, always arm's length. If the staff is out of the room, whether they're in their bedroom or they're in the bathroom or whatever, it cannot be marked a 7 or an 8.
Correct.
Always and never means always and never.
Thank
And
you.
then, or if they drop to small group during the overnight, again, that's not part of that section. That's a separate section.
All right, next is Kathy Bruno. Hi, Kathy. If a person lives alone in their own home with some support coming in, even if a couple hours daily, they would be their own caregiver, right? So the last example Ryan reviewed, I would have marked as they live on their own primary caregiver rather than grandma, I think.
And that's okay. I mean, again,
Yeah.
that's a team decision.
Mhm.
It's, who does the bulk of it. I mean, if they come in a couple hours a day and they do meal prep, I mean, that's probably borderline, I guess. So the team would have to make that decision on who's the primary caregiver.
Right.
So certainly if that's what the team feels, Kathy, that would be okay.
And Wendy just wanted to follow up with a statement from her previous question statement. Also, that hands-on would be a restraint if the individual is resisting.
I would think, right?
Dr. Lloyd?
Sorry.
Yes, agreed. Wendy's
Okay.
clarifying that's the difference. Like a restraint restricts movement when an individual's trying to move, whereas like a guide along or a, you know, overhand support, hand over hand, where they're, accepting the guidance is different than a restraint.
Thank you. Okay, next, Amanda Evans. If someone has medical concerns or a medical diagnosis that is characterized by behavioral aggression, self-harm, how would this be labeled in the line? For example, someone with, oh God, Leishmaniasis.
Nines. That's
Oh, thank
nines.
you. Will bite their fingers down to the bone or bite off their lips if their teeth are not removed and the individual is left unattended. They could also hit themselves repeatedly until stopped by someone else if the individual is left unrestrained, and the restraints are for their safety. Since this is part of the medical diagnosis, would these behaviors be tracked and recorded under the behavioral section or medical section?
I would defer to the behavior support plan on
It's a
that.
medical diagnosis.
Yeah, that's a medical diagnosis, but is there a behavior support plan that addresses these behaviors related to that diagnosis? I guess would be the question.
But behaviorally, we'd still have to have some level of intervention for it.
Correct, right?
Even if it's even if it's medical in origin, we're not just going to let somebody bite off their fingers and their lips. We're going to have some
Correct.
level
Yes,
of
thank you,
intervention
Jill.
in that behavior support plan. Sure.
Thank you,
Correct.
Dr. Racinos.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, next.
But you definitely want to make sure that medical diagnosis is in there. And I guess that would be reflected under question number 16, because that is not a mental health diagnosis, I'm guessing, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
No,
So-
it's a neurological, it's a
Right.
genetic diagnosis.
So that would be appropriately marked in the section where that would be the diagnosis. But as Dr. Racino said, yeah, that there'd have to be a behavior plan to address it.
Okay, and Courtney is stating close. Well, first part, close by is arm's length. I guess she's asking if that is correct. And then hands on is hands on. So I guess she's just looking for clarification on that. And then Wendy stated the manual says that hands on is actual physical hands on. So yes, I think everybody is in agreement with that. Next is Lorraine. Lorraine asks, I recently had a provider submit a staff proximity guideline for an individual receiving one-to-one supports. In their guidelines, they instruct staff to be within earshot. The individual has one-to-one supports in the lawn states line of sight. Is the language earshot appropriate to say?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb in here and say no. So DDS doesn't have a thing called earshot. Isn't that correct? Mary
Correct.
Beth?
Yeah,
And-
no, not that I'm aware of. I mean, we usually
Yeah,
get
it's
our,
not a thing.
I know between the public division and private division, we certainly, I think there's the level of supervision or whatever is a little bit different, but, you could be line of sight, and still hear a person, but you want, earshot is what? Then you're probably not line of sight. Because but I don't, I would say you're correct, Dr. Racinos. You can't. It has to
I've
be
heard-
clearly defined, I would say.
I've
in the
heard,
behavior
I've read people calling it within hearing distance. And I think we definitely question that because that could be very subjective. One person
Right.
could hear something further or closer away than another. So,
Yeah, because I was thinking they could be doing food prep and making meals or whatever. You could still hear Mary Beth over in her room, but now you're not even line of sight.
right.
I can hear her.
I think the safest thing really is, I think, to stick with the,
Right.
the language that we are using, meaning DDS within our policies and so forth and our guidelines for supervision.
Yeah, I agree with that as well.
And, it's just to add to that, like Mary Beth's point, say you're doing meal prep and you turn on the blender and now earshot is different because this
Correct.
noise is drowning out your ability to hear. So it's relative to so many things. And like Dr. Racino said, it's too unclear for staff to be able to follow.
Yeah. And I mean, we do rely heavily, and I'm sure Dr. Sinos knows, especially if we're doing, and it doesn't even matter if you're doing URR or not. Individuals, could have a behavior support plan and still be in small group, but, when completing the level of need, that's why we heavily rely on the behavior support plan and supervision guidelines to accurately reflect the individual's need.
Thank you all for your input on that. Next, Wendy is stating if they are resisting it, it is it a restraint? But if they are just assisting, then it is hand over hand assistance.
Is that more of a statement or a question, I think?
I think that's a
What-
statement.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Wendy.
Okay. All right. Sherry. Jessica asked, question 82 for the level support has one-to-one support only, either at arm's length or in constant line of sight. Can someone be just one-to-one without being line of sight, arm's length?
Well, when somebody has well, go ahead, Dawn.
I actually was like thinking about that. I'm like, I think so.
How
The
can
point
I-
of one-to-one is that if something occurs behaviorally that the team has decided you needs intervention, like quick-ish intervention, that's why the person has a one-to-one. So the closer you are, the
Mhm.
more sense it makes to say that that's a one-to-one. So line of sight, you're the only person you're watching only that person and can, react or make some kind of move toward them to assist them as quickly as possible. And arm's length, of course, is, the closest that you could be. So I don't think we can call one-to-one support anything other than that. But of course, if people, want to discuss this, please, let's do that.
And I would agree with you. You have to remember, and this is the Pratt manager coming out and the URR facilitator, I guess. When we are funding somebody one-to-one, it is a dedicated one-to-one, and as Dr. Racino said, for that individual only. So if we're funding somebody who's a dedicated one-to-one, what's the justification if the staff isn't readily available to that individual? Again, there could be a fade plan or a titration thing where the staff is backing off or maybe doing something else, working with someone else during a specific period of time. But in general, what is typically needed? What most often, if an individual needs that one-to-one, then that is how that should be reflected, and that's what the one-to-one should be doing.
I would just add a nuance with that. Say the primary need is when they're around their housemates because they get easily agitated and it puts them at risk. Whereas like when they're in the bathroom, you don't need the staff to be line of sight or arm's length. That's a time when their supervision level would change, even though they do have a
Correct.
designated one-to-one for
Right.
the time of concern, which is the primary issue and most of the shift, they are
Mhm.
in need of that support. So certainly there can be differences
Right.
in different circumstances, but as Mary Beth said, primarily, they need that one-to-one to
Right.
be responsive.
Which I
And
think-
that, oh, go ahead, Dawn.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that what Dr. Lloyd said makes a case for a provider being able to break down, those nuances, right? So the person is, one-to-one in, in the home, in the common areas of the home or in their bedroom or whatever, but they're, they can be out of the person's line of sight when they're in the bathroom because we're giving them privacy to do that. Or if they're in the community, then they go back to, a one-to-one or a day program, maybe they're a small group. So a provider, I think, being able to give us a breakdown of the different environments and what their supervision needs are would be super helpful. I know not everybody does that, and that's okay, but I think it's helpful to flesh out the nuance that Dr. Lloyd just spoke about.
Yeah. And Lorraine said, thank you. I agree. I was just wanted to make sure I'm instructing properly when I say they need to use our language. Yep. And then Lucy has a question. For an individual receiving one-to-one supports, can they have alone time? We just discovered that a person has one-to-one and also has 1 hour of alone time. Well, I hope it's part of the FADE plan, right? I don't
Yeah,
know.
it would have
What
to
do you
be
think?
part of the
I hope that's
titration
part
plan.
of the titration
That would be
or FADE
nice.
plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
again, we're funding a dedicated one-to-one. If the staff can totally be away, why is it 1 hour is not two? Like, what's the justification? maybe if he didn't have a 1-to-1 all the time, then maybe he wouldn't need it, or what, not, you know what I mean? Maybe that's part of the problem. They're too restricted. And I'm sure Dr. Lloyd and Dr. Racinos could speak to this. I mean, it's very restrictive to have a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1.
Mhm.
Right. So, our goal is to have them be in the most least restrictive environment with staffing and environmental as possible. So I would hope that's part of the staff feeding plan, not the rule that he can be alone totally 1 hour a day, but the rest of the waking hours, he has to have a dedicated 1-to-1. But that's just me.
Or if there's a reason for that 1 hour, like, is that alone time?
In his
Like, when the
bedroom.
person, right, or yeah, right, the person maybe
Is
is
it just
first
in the
waking up,
bedroom?
or they're on their way,
Right.
they're gonna go to sleep, or they're
Right.
having private time, whatever it is, like,
Right.
there should be some reasoning
Right.
for that.
And for that alone, because we do look at that for lawn reviews, especially if they could have one, whether they get it or they don't, because we had this with a lawn review at one point, whether they get the alone time or not, the level of need for behavior section definitely cannot be marked a 7 or an 8 if they are totally out of line of sight and staff's not even around for 1 hour a day. But it doesn't mean they don't need it, but there should be a justification. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
And
Alicia said, I have called it designate. I think she's referring to the 1-to-1 staffing, or I have called it designated staffing, like someone with borderline who requires immediate staff assistance at times due to behavior to prevent it from escalating further. The individual is able to have time without staff being in her room with her, but when she needs someone, they need to be readily available.
that's very good, Alicia. And that would probably go in sync with that's why continuous support. And they may have a 1-to-1, but marking those behaviors, be readily available would be that continuous support needed if they could be not in line of sight or that. I think that's all in the chat.
Yep. Any other questions?
I hope this was helpful.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate this.
You're welcome. And Brooke, I will send you the PowerPoint if you want it. And then you could
Yes.
send out to people if that, yep.
Yes. And I'll send out the lawn manual again. I already sent it, but I'll send it with the PowerPoint so everyone
Yep.
has it
Yep.
put
I will
together.
forward it to, and I will forward that to you. And as I said, just for those from the North region, on that last page or the before questions, we did add Susan Clem and updated that. So you have Susan's email address.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thanks
Have a
a
great
lot.
weekend, everyone.
Have a good weekend. Enjoy. It's supposed to be nice.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.